The only thing more terrifying than the last 12 minutes of this episode of Spooky 30s are the first 92. Welcome to Spooky 30s, a podcast where I, Stella Cheeks, a 30-something of questionable taste, invite my friends on to turn me into the horror-obsessed fangirl I look like but never was. Each episode, my special guest picks a horror property that I just have to know. We watch it, read a bunch of cultural criticism, both peer-reviewed and publicly published. Praise be to the internet scholars and the Tumblr historians. And then we have a hopefully super interesting conversation about it for your ear holes. My special guest this month is an international Beetlejuice impersonator, Chicago burlesque weirdo, award-winning scream queen starring in the hit Shudder exclusive Revealer, and an all-around creepy guy. It's Helena Handbasket, also known as Kato AC? What are we doing?
That's fine.
Okay, because I will definitely be calling you Helena because I never
I don't mind.
Call you by your real name. But you're a
Call
movie
me by my
star
name.
now.
I am a movie star.
We're not talking about Call Me By Your Name.
Oh, but it's funny because
I
the
know.
director is also...
Oh, yeah. I get it. But I don't want to talk about it.
No, we're not going to.
We're not talking about Armie Hammer
We're not talking
films.
about cannibalism in this episode.
Yeah, we're not talking about real cannibalism. We'd only talk about sexy cannibalism.
Yeah. Anytime. Literally all of our chats.
Yeah. You should have also put also obsessed with Hannibal, just like Stella.
Yeah, painfully. Yeah, really. Like, it's getting to be a problem.
Anyways, I'm very excited to have you on, not only because I get to go, I got a movie star on my podcast, but because you're like my friend or whatever.
That's nice. I like that.
Oh, I spoiled it. How do you know me?
Oh, we have been burlesque and acty friends for 10 years now.
Woof.
It's been about 10. Yeah, I think it has been actually 10 years, which is insane to me because I did the math on that and I was like, oh no, I'm old.
I like that it was, oh no, I'm old, and not, oh no, I've been friends with her for too long.
Oh no, that part's great, and I love that part.
What is your relationship to the horror genre, other than being a literal scream queen?
Other than being a literal scream queen with another horror film coming out later in 2023, I think. I started off. I was always a self-proclaimed creepy kid, so I was
shocker.
Surprise. I was like the kid who would like as soon as it hit September, I was like, I'm gonna wear a skeleton costume to school because I was that weirdo. Like I really liked having like I was one of those kids who had their ears pierced really young, like at age 6. So I like had little spiders and little skulls, and, like because we just like Halloween was the holiday in our house, and then I got older and I was exposed to horror at a very young age by like 7 or 8 years old. Like I saw Alien, I saw Idle Hands, which is not, it's more comedy than it is horror. But at the time I was like so horrified by it.
But if you're a kid and you're not understanding the homages and the jokes and stuff, you're still just watching somebody get stabbed or whatever happens in that movie.
Correct. And I had like
Never seen it.
The most ridiculous imagination. So I stayed away from horror for years because I was too scared. And then I ended up dating someone who was like very vehemently into horror, and like I kept the horror side of it and ended the relationship.
We're like, well, actually, I just think that you really should watch this movie because it's like a masterpiece.
To be fair,
the
the first one of those films that I watched was Halloween. So I watched Halloween for the first time when I was like 25. And then I like really started taking to it. Like so I watched a lot of those classics and then really started to dive in more and look at the subgenres and see what I was really interested in. Really like witches. I really like demons and possession. I really like ghosts. I don't like zombies or like apocalyptic things because I'm like, it's too close to home and I don't want to think about it. But now I am like, horror is like a comfort food thing. So like, you know this, I'll text you and be like, I'm rewatching Hannibal because I'm sad.
Yeah, Hannibal's your like depression show. Hannibal's my I'm sick show. I guess I'll just watch Hannibal because he's having a nice time and I'm not.
Yeah, he's having a snack and a dinner party and maybe a crush on a boy, and I like that. Yep.
Yeah, we always say in this family, death to the author, except for Brian Fuller.
Yeah, that sweet little weird Leo. Fangoria posted on their Instagram like a tribute to him. And he just had like these red glasses on and this like shock of white hair. And I was like, this fucking weirdo. I love him.
I think for this Halloween, he like dressed up as Tilda Swinton from Suspiria, like in the red caftan. I'm pretty sure that was his Halloween costume this year, which is
absolute troll.
An excellent transition, because what are we talking about this episode?
Suspiria.
Which we've been singing to the Disturbia theme song for the past
We're gonna get
hour.
That's all we can sing so we don't get in trouble.
People who care about licensing don't listen to these podcasts.
And I know for a fact Rihanna does. So we're good. We should be good.
Cool,
we're besties.
Cool.
Yeah, we're watching Suspiria. This was not the first one that you picked, though. Why did you change to this one?
I don't even remember what the first one I picked was.
Neither do I.
It might have been Halloween, I feel. Like, I'm honestly surprised that hasn't happened.
Yeah, it's not on the list. Spoiler, everybody, it's not on the list for this season.
You know what? That might be on the list if we do this again. I chose Suspiria for a number of reasons. I think that it is, especially in 1977, is a little bit of an underdog of a horror film. And as Bobby was mentioning earlier, it is kind of the first foray for this season into Italian horror, which is like a huge, huge influence on the genre. Overall.
Definitely on a bunch of directors. Like there's like one of my favorite quotes that I read of John Carpenter going up to the Goblin guys and being like, "Hey, I know you guys. I ripped you off."
Yeah,
being like super proud about it.
He's like, "I stole your music." Love that.
I love John Carpenter.
Yeah, what a sweet little troll. Kind of like a Brian Fuller, right?
We love a troll who is like self-aware and is like, "I'm just here for the vibes."
Yeah, yes, very that. And I also think that there's a lot to talk about with these. And I think these films, both 77 and 2018, are super polarizing. And I think that whether we love it or not, it makes for a very interesting conversation.
Well, we shall see.
Let's dive in.
Yeah, so my thing before, I had never seen either of these, obviously. But like I was aware of them because like it's hard to be, I don't know, a semi-spooky lady and not like know what Suspiria is. And I knew that they were very iconic, but I had the same kind of anxiety anticipation that I had before I watched the Hellraiser ones, like where I was like pre-scared because like I knew that I was walking into something that had a dramatic effect on a lot of people. It's not a straight slasher. I did know it was divisive, and I had like a lot of pre-anxiety and fear. And with the Hellraiser series, when we did that, like I watched one and then I was like, well, I'm fucking obsessed. But that was like more about like Clive Barker and like, whatever. And then with this one, when I watched the first one, it didn't like snag me. And then I knew that the new one was like even more gruesome. And I was like, I don't know, man. And like, we'll get to it. But like, it was a lot. Yeah. And I feel like my pre-anxiety was like very justified, at least with the new one. So like, that's even part of the reason why I had like even put it off. Especially, I don't know if we ever talked about this in maybe the first episode I ever did or in the trailer, but like one of the horror things that like really triggered hardcore nightmares for me was the opening sequence of American Horror Story Coven. Yeah. Because I'm
like the title credits?
No. The like scene in the attic.
Oh, yeah.
The like torture and the like I have a very it's interesting because like we think of witches, and we'll talk about it a bunch obviously, but like as like feminists and like, spooky girls, like it's fun to like reclaim the idea of witches, and like a bunch of dumb people on Instagram would be like, "Oh, we're the daughters of the witches you didn't burn," and all that stuff. White women. But like also in the history of witchcraft and like the lore of witchcraft and a lot of like actual horror that deals with witchcraft, it is very visceral and like body heavy and body torture, body like horror, sacrifices,
mutilation,
liquids, mutilations. It's like I kept texting Bobby. I was like, I'm having a big Dean Winchester like witches are gross moment watching this because like that is the whole point of like a lot of the mythology around witches is like they are the like other, right? Like women are gross and have babies and liquids come out of them, and then they use these liquids and their evil machinations to like bring down men or whatever, But like, yeah, like even when we talked about it in the Thing episode, when people were like, The Thing is actually like a really feminist story because look at all of the oozing. It's like,
Oh, no.
okay, I don't know if that makes it feminine, but like,
Don't talk about my oozing like that.
okay, I do understand how we're relating the oozing to the women, but like, yeah, so like witchcraft and witches and stuff are like kind of gross.
Yeah.
And like, so that like, knowing that American Horror Story Coven, which a lot of people love.
Yeah, it's a lot of people's favorite season.
Yeah, because it's like, women being badasses, right? But like that type of body horror is tough for me.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like I can do a fly transformation or
a werewolf
or American Werewolf in London transformation. But
Great
like
film.
the moment it becomes like almost torture-y, like I don't know. So this was tough for me. And like going into it, I was already pre-scared. And then like the movie itself was a lot. So I'm excited to talk about it. But yeah, that is kind of my relationship to it. I've always been like pre-scared of it, but like also have that, being lured by the idea of like witches, right? Like being lured, like that's part of it too. Like they are, trying to ensnare you into their traps or whatever. Because women are wily.
Sorry I did this to you.
No, it's good. We should talk about it.
Yeah.
Susie, Sarah. I once read that names which begin with the letter S are the names of snakes.
All right, so let's talk about it.
Okay.
So we are going to talk about the 1977 Suspiria, and we're going to talk about I don't even want to call it a remake, the homage,
Yeah,
the
that article that-
reimagination.
The reimagination of it.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to read the Suspiria de Profundis, which is the source material that like inspired Dario Argento and Daria and Dario.
Daria.
What a
and
fun
Dario.
household.
Yeah.
But I do want to give her credit because she like wrote half the script and people are always just like Dario. I'm like, but
Yeah,
like
she sure did.
don't forget Dario with an A.
Correct. Just like the TV show.
But I do want to read it eventually because I do think it's really interesting that the idea of the three mothers actually comes from this like weird treatise. So we'll get to eventually. I feel like I failed in all of the other episodes. I did all the source material reading. I'm definitely failing the
There
audience.
were so many pieces of source material. There were so many articles. Like we could talk about. Clearly, people have a lot to say about this.
Yeah,
one.
it's funny to go from Phantasm where like it was very hard to find stuff like source material and especially like peer-reviewed stuff to going to Suspiria, which is like frankly like a glut. There's like almost too much.
Right.
Talk about like visceral stuff. Like there was like a glut of information almost to the point where it was like I'm reading too many other opinions. I can't.
Yeah.
I need to figure out what my own opinion is first because it is divisive. Like it is definitely one of those films or franchises, not franchises, but you know what I mean, that like keeps rolling around in your brain box.
Correct.
So we'll be talking about both the movies, and then the peer-reviewed articles that we did read were The Ballerina Body, Horror, Spectatorship, Female Subjectivity, and the Abject in Dario Argento's Suspiria 1977 by Charlotte Goog of the Irish Horror Journal or Cinema Journal that we've used a couple times. Shout out to that journal. It fucks.
Yeah,
it's ruled.
truly.
And then Appropriating the Abject, Witchcraft in Dario Argento's and Dario Nicolodi's Suspiria, and David and Luca's 2018 remake, because I don't know how to say their last names. And I'm not going to Google it because I don't respect men, by Luca Lewin
You're a
Davies.
witch then.
Yeah, I'm a witch. I'm just leaning into it. So I'm...
Yeah.
If there-
Jars of menstrual blood and
Yeah.
stuff.
So those are the two peer-reviewed articles that we're going to kind of be bouncing back on. And then obviously we'll be referencing and like kind of talking about all of the like non-peer-reviewed articles that we read. And so just look to the link in this podcast if you want to read or look at any of them. Quick movie synopsis that I definitely pulled from Google because I hate writing synopsis. It's for the 1977 one. Susie travels to Germany to attend ballet school. When she arrives late on a stormy night, no one lets her in, and she sees Pat, another student, fleeing from the school. When Pat reaches her apartment, she is murdered. The next day, Susie is admitted to her new school and has a difficult time settling in. She hears noises and often feels ill. As more people die, Susie uncovers the terrifying secret of the place.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
There you go.
And then in the new one, Susie is the terrifying secret of the place.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah, I guess like
Yeah.
let's just go first thoughts and impressions. Like, what do you think of the 1977 one? Let's just kind of break it down film by film.
Yeah. Well, I said it before, like this is a bit of an underdog classic. It predates all those 80s slasher films. And I think it really, in a lot of ways, kind of paved the way for it.
Yeah, she's like Susie at the end of the first one is like a prototypical final girl. She's
Yeah.
like a gothic final girl. She's literally like survived a gothic fairy tale, killed the evil witch and is exiting a on fire building and just smiling and its
what
remains.
could be more final girl than that?
Yeah.
Like, she truly is the last person standing in this film.
And smiling about it. She's like, I really nailed that.
I think that, it brings up a lot of conversations around gender, especially for 1977. A lot of conversations around gender. I think that its use of dance is really fascinating. It doesn't do it as much in the 77 version, but the whole ethos of it paved the way for films like Black Swan, Climax, all of these like horror through dance things.
Through ballet specifically,
too. And then, it's about witches. Like, I was just kind of fascinated by that.
Yeah, I'm going to just be like straight about it and we'll talk about it. But I don't really like that movie. I don't like the 1977 Suspiria a lot. I think it's really beautiful and the music's cool and the vibes are like there. The aesthetic is A+. But like the movie itself, like, LOL, what is a plot? Like we have this question that we talk about, like, is the horror on top of the plot or is the plot dependent on the horror? And like the horror is just plopped on top of a shitty fairy tale.
Sure. Yep.
Right? Like it truly is, let's make a pretty movie. Like I'll put pretty girls in it and I'll put pretty cool costumes in it and I'll put
pretty lights
setting and like the craziest, prettiest set. And then like
we'll figure it out the rest. It's fine.
That one's good. That one's bad. The good one wins.
What else?
Did it.
Wash
we
your
nailed
hands. Let's go have a coffee.
Yeah. And I can understand that it's like 1977 and it is this like, it is before the slashers. Like, I think it's a really big, it's very interesting to me that in the first one, the women kill other women like men. Like they stab them. Like we get like mini shots of like the penetration and like we talked about it in the Scream episode and like the, men, women, and chainsaws, the like Carol Clover article that's like very, foundational for academic like research into horror films, like the idea of the knife being like a phallus. And like it is very interesting that these female monsters kill like men.
Right.
Which I think is because even though this movie is predominantly features women, it is still helmed by a man.
Correct.
A man who is a shit bag, right? Like we can just say that, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure people who listen to this are maybe like, oh, I love Dario Argento and he's like really important. And like that can be true, but
he's
like
incredibly foundational for horror. It doesn't mean that he's not a shit bag.
Yeah. To like, he had that one quote that I'm going to paraphrase because I don't feel like it's necessary to like accurately quote him. But it's something like, I love beautiful women and I rather see a beautiful woman murdered than a ugly woman or a man. I don't have to explain myself. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess you don't have to explain yourself. Maybe you should keep those inside thoughts. But like,
some thoughts are inside thoughts.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
I mean, and the new one is also directed by a man. So like that is difficult to parse when I think about these movies. And I think that that's part of the reason that these movies are really complex and complicated and don't have a swath of people being like, I love them, I hate them. It's just like, that movie, like, I like things about it. Like, I feel like people have like just this complicated relationship. And it does definitely start in the 1977 one because it's beautiful. And like, I think the acting, especially because it is so over the top, actually I think the acting is pretty good.
It's not bad.
I think Susie...
Also, all of those actors are speaking their own native language.
Which is crazy.
And they're all acting in scenes like, I don't know if Jessica Harper speaks Austrian, where she was in that scene with Sarah. Like, that whole exchange was wild.
I think that's so interesting because like it does lend to like with the dub, it does lend to like this, everything's like a second like off and that like helps with the like a diegetic experience of like the sound being off and like the like disorienting, supernatural. Yeah. So I think that's effective. But I do love in the new one how there are just a swath of different languages. There's like at least four different languages because there's German and English and French and telepathy. That counts.
Yeah, telepathy totally counts. 1000%. In this family, yes. Hands down.
I said 4. I was going to make 4 happen.
Yeah. We've stuck the dismount. Come on.
Thank you so much. But like that leads to its own type of disorientating, like
everyone's the other.
There are like private conversations in public settings. Like that is very queer theory type stuff too.
Yeah.
Like we're doing the private in public type thing. And so I think the choice to keep the spirit of all the different languages, but then like show the different languages was really smart for the homage.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 1977 one, it's stunning. It's beautiful. I love hyper color stuff. I mean, that's part of the reason I like Hellraiser, right? Because I was like, I like how fake it looks. I like how fake the blood looks. Like that adds to it. I love the like Technicolor, like paint blood.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Have you seen The Love Witch?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, that is one to for sure add to the list in terms of like that Technicolor. I think it was made in like 2018 as well, but it has that same. It's very Argento influence, and you can tell that Suspiria was like hugely behind it.
Yeah, I think that even if this was like the worst movie ever, I think the importance of like the visual like mark that it left on filmmaking, and knowing that other directors like Guillermo del Toro and stuff like point to that movie as like, oh, that's very inspiring to me. I think that is in itself worth it, right? Because it is so stunning. And like the women in it do a good job. I think Madame Blanc in the 1977 one ruled.
Yeah.
Her
voice. Ugh, I loved her voice.
So good. And I liked all of I know that they originally wrote the script as like, we want them to be young girls, but then they like aged them up because they were like,
they're like,
maybe
we cannot wrangle this many children in a horror film. Like, no, there's no way.
Maybe this is not the controversy we're seeking. No. But they did do things like make the doorknobs higher, and like gave that Alice in Wonderland feel, right?
The really tall, long doors, the long hallways, those really long tracking shots from the jump. We have those really long tracking shots that switch of like how far it takes her to get to the airport door, how far far away she is from the terminal, and that back and forth, just like the idea of being that small and being a kid and being like, this hallway is so long.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of that going on.
Yeah, but also like especially Susie being in a new environment where she's trying to impress and like be a good kid too in an environment that is overwhelming and impressive and oppressive, really lends itself to that like little kid in Alice in Wonderland or in like in the dream world, right? And
like the warped door frames, the soft edges, the rounded, yeah, it's all very intentional.
But also how the women in the 1977 one act like children to each other, like stick out their tongues and tease each other. They literally have like a lock-in sleepover. What is this, church? Kind of, I guess. So I think that it does a good job of like, they set out to make a horror fairy tale, and I think the 1977 one does make a horror fairy tale, and like a lot of horror fairy tales are really simplistic. There's a good guy and an evil guy, and like
Hansel and Gretel,
the virgin
Little Red Riding
defeats the whore, right? Like that Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Like I think that the 1977 one absolutely accomplished its goal. It's just because so many people love it so much, I was expecting, I think maybe my opinions about it would be different if I didn't have like the bar and the expectation. Because I've also seen like stills and stuff from it too. I'm like, oh, this is pretty. A thing about dance and witches, that seems pretty cool. And then it was like, oh, this is just aesthetically pleasing.
Sure. And like, also, I feel as conflicted as you do about it. I love Suspiria for very select reasons, and I don't like Suspiria for very select reasons too. Like, this has been an incredibly influential film across the board, but also like Suspiria was influential on Revealer as well in terms of color aesthetic.
Oh yeah, totally.
We had a lot of dance, all of that stuff that we pulled from Suspiria and applied to Revealer. But I also, everything that you're saying right now, I am very much in agreement on. That I'm conflicted about this film, and that's why I wanted to talk about it.
Right. And I think that's the interesting takeaway I have for both these films is like, I like them in spite of themselves. Yeah. Actually, like there are things like I do like the 2018 one, but I almost like it in spite of itself. And the 1977 one, like thinking of, because you can't take it away from its like effect of other things, right? So even if I didn't think like, oh, this plot rules or I care about these characters, like the effect is really important. And the idea of dance in horror and like how that has a legacy too, like for your movie, but like Black Swan, and also like both the articles we read are about like abject horror. So like the abject being like your body, right? Like So that's from the Kristeva article. And she is also one of those foundational women who write academically about horror, like Carol Clover or Barbara Creed, which like I wanted to read some monstrous feminine stuff, but it's like mostly actually about Carrie and not about Suspiria. I'm like,
Can't wait to watch Carrie with you.
I never watched Carrie, and I feel like I need to watch it before I read more monstrous feminine. But like, so Barbara Creed obviously talks about the monstrous feminine, which is abject horror, and then Kristeva is the one that like really wrote about abject horror and like women and like. So I think we've talked a little about abject horror. I think in the Thing episode, which would make sense because like. Yeah. The grossness of it. And definitely in the Hellraiser one. But like, abjection is what is experienced when the foundations of the ego are dissolved and one's pre-subjectual corporeal thingness is exposed. So like, I'm a human, like we all like, you know,
Viscera.
whatever. But then like, oh, my blood is exposed. My bones are exposed. My, you know, the inside comes out.
Right.
Which is really interesting when we think about dance, especially specifically ballet. And that's what that one article we talked about, the ballerina body horror, about how ballet is literally about clean lines and tight leotards to keep all the flabbiness inside and like, and fluidity. And like, it is hyper feminine, but it is also like weirdly
rigid.
genderless.
Yeah. And there's a rigidity to it that like lends itself to horror. Like, I love watching ballerinas. Ballerina bodies are phenomenal. Ballet is beautiful. But it is pretty horrific what people have to go through to get to that level.
Well, and it's like
know?
the hidden, right? Like, so like we talk about all the time when we watch wrestling, there's like people will be like, it's not ballet. And it's like, yeah, ballet is like kind of harder than this. Like wrestling is hard, but like ballet is
really
hard because like your feet will be bleeding and broken and
you'll be losing toenails.
But you still have to show grace and beauty and like maintain an air of like clean femininity and not it's not challenging like it's not
easily consumed.
Yeah, it's not I don't want to undercut ballet. Obviously it's a challenging art form, but like it's not, the idea is not, at least old ballet, right, is not to like challenge the structure of society. It's like, no, this is like beautiful and graceful,
effortless and classic,
but it is literally a mask over like the abject horror of what is happening with these like performers' bodies, specifically women. I know men go through it too, but like we're talking about women here, right? Like their feet are fucked up, their bodies can be like stunted from if you like start it from like a young age,
knees
like
and hips.
The idea, like a lot of ballerinas have like really aggressive like body dysmorphia and eating disorders because it's like I'm exerting control over my body and that is a victory. I'm
also
controlling
fertility issues as well.
I'm controlling the abjectness. I'm controlling the viscera. Like I will never let them see it. Whereas like wrestlers, like you get to show the abject horror. Like that's part of it.
Literally
so,
blade.
Like, you don't like, even if it's hard a skill, like you don't have to mask everything. Like
right.
So
the whole
shut
point
up, JR,
is
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Right.
That's a different podcast.
I had a very interesting question in regards to this, jumping off of what we were talking about, because it ties into the quote I pulled from the ballerina body horror is value defined in her performance as the persona. Mm-hmm. And this idea of object distance femininity or this kind of display of femininity or this kind of classic thing. And dance, specifically ballet, being this ideal vision of a woman, and how that applies to us as burlesque people, as people who have stepped into a genre of dance that is very feminine and sexual and this kind of like, you know, corsets and rhinestones and this like glitzy, glamoury thing. I mean, I know we do a bunch of crazy shit like eating pies and planting things on stage. But
yeah, like we'll talk about burlesque in general. We'll not talk about the burlesque that we do.
Right. Burlesque in general, the company that we keep aside. But how does this idea of the object and distance feminine play into our lives as burlesque dancers?
Well, the interesting thing, like if we're thinking about Italian stuff, like literally the word burlesque comes from the word burlesco, which means can't remember right off the top of my head, but it's like to make fun of, like it's a send up, right? Like burlesque parody. Is a parody. Burlesque is a type of drag, right? Like it is supposed to be, I am hyper feminized to the point that I'm like a cheesecake cartoon. That's why I'm wearing a corset and I have rhinestones and my tits are pushed up and I'm like twirling tassels and I'm like, the point is that I am almost like objectifying myself, but there is like power in the objectification and it is a commentary, right? Like we all know that I don't look like this, right? Like
Right.
this is not actually what is the hyper femininity is the point where, and like if I'm offending any ballet dancers, I'm really not meaning to. I like
No, not at
really,
all.
really
Yeah.
respect the art form, but like the point from my perspective, and at least from the perspective of this like article, and I think from what the 1977 Suspiria is going for is like, it is like the perfect femininity. It is it is what female should be, and it is
ideal.
the ideal, right? Like it is in a way upholding a patriarchal structure through that type of dance.
Correct.
And obviously it can be subversive, but like not in this context, right? Yeah. Or even like think of the Black Swan. I haven't seen it in a long time, but like she literally succumbs to it because she is trying to be this perfect character for herself.
Her final line is,
quote
I was
unquote.
perfect.
Right, I was perfect, but it's also like being directed by a man and like, you know, I'm trying to be this perfect idealized female. I'm supposed to be the Black Swan, but also the like perfect like White Swan, and like what is this dichotomy inside of me? And I think like we kind of get away with it in burlesque to be like, well, I'm making fun of it. And even if somebody doesn't understand that that's what burlesque is, and they're just like, I like rhinestones and boas, which there are frankly plenty of people that do that, like you're still performing drag.
Yeah.
You know,
You're
like
performing it is a performance of an idealized thing.
right. It is still hyper feminized, regardless of if your like intention is to be comedic about it.
Sure.
Because there is comedy in hypersexuality, regardless of if you think it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
like porn is hilarious. It's hot. It's also hilarious.
It's hot and hilarious.
Right?
But yeah, to your point about the ballet and it being genderless and it being very lithe, and you know, typically when we think of ballerinas, especially in 1977, we're thinking about very thin-framed people, you know, no curves, no nothing. It's kind of almost like a model, like an artist model or a piece of clay or something like that. Right. So I think it also creates this idea that Susie and all of the other dancers are incredibly malleable,
right,
and can be
and they're
formed.
puppets, right?
Yeah, they're puppets through this whole thing.
That's part of the point. Like they're not only is the ballet the mask for the evil behind it, it's hiding the abject. Ballet literally hides the abject, like the toenails coming off and things, but it is hiding the abject of the evil and the witchcraft and the like this, you know, the stickiness of femininity. But then also like they are students and in a dance company, and they are like being taught and puppeted by these witches, right? They're who are hiding as dance teachers. It's kind of like the perfect cover.
Yeah, totally.
Like we need bodies for sacrifice, and then like maybe we'll find somebody that can be in our coven. But like, you know, it's like it's like a vampire running a blood mink.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. Very that.
Yeah, right? Yeah, so I don't love the 1977 one, but I think there is at least stuff to talk about, and it makes sense why people like it, and it is foundational, but it is still, I hate to say that it's really basic. It's very basic in its storytelling,
sure,
even if it's transgressive and foundational and beautiful in the way it tells that basic story.
Correct. Yeah.
And I mean, you can't get away
from that. Has merit. You know, it's like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
but
and
it's not prolifically told.
Right. And I guess to give the Dario with an O and Daria with an A their credit, like it is pretty amazing to have a movie in 1977 that is almost completely female, and then like the men in it more or less are useless. Though there is something to be said that like the men in it are written off because they're like disfigured in some way,
yeah,
or
they
they're
each
like
have something, with the exception of the young boy at the academy who Susie might or might not have a crush on, and then he's gone like halfway through it.
Like they
we
tried
never
to
see him
have
again.
like a love story and be like, no, we're not lesbians here or whatever, and it's like, okay, whatever. You definitely are like kind of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But
this is a girls' boarding school. Come on.
Yeah, you're doing some experimentation. Even if it's like not for you, you try it once, right?
Yeah, totally. Try it before you buy it.
But like the fact that the men in the school and who are like allowed to be around the women are deformed in some way, or are like themselves not welcome in traditional society, I think is, I hesitate to say interesting. I think it's definitely a choice. Like it doesn't, because no normal, well, like maintained regular man would be caught dead in the school of witches, right?
Sure.
And the like the men that we see who are competent are like, well, I know stories about them, so I'll give you this exposition and you can go solve this problem.
Right.
I, as a man, know everything about these women. I did a lot of research. They
Apparently,
were just
doctor-patient confidentiality did not exist in 1977. He was willing to just be like, yeah, Patricia came to me and she had all of this crazy shit to say and I'm going to tell you everything. It's like, what?
Yeah, but it is interesting that the men that are allowed to exist in the school are like also societal like rejects essentially. And I think it's a really smart choice that doesn't exist in the 2018 one. Like we only see a couple men and they aren't associated with the school at all. Like the school itself is completely women.
Correct.
That's it.
Yep.
No thanks. Okay, yeah, that's kind of like those are my thoughts. I know I want to talk way more about the reimagining, frankly, because it's way more interesting. So we'll get the 1977 one out of the way. I'm sorry if you came here because you wanted to talk about like the foundational.
Oh, no.
I meant the listeners. I'm sorry if the listeners are here because they're like, I love Dario Argento. I can't wait to hear what she thinks about him. She thinks he's
it's fine.
He exists. I get that he's important, and
It's
I don't
one of
care
those
about
films where, like, if someone was like, "I've never seen Suspiria," I'd be like, "I'll watch that with you."
Right.
But it's not one of those films where I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be pivotal for your horror education." But I do think if you're gonna watch a Dario Argento film, this is the one to watch.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. And like people compare him in all these articles, like to like being the Italian Hitchcock, and I think whether or not we're thinking about I'm not thinking about it from a film legacy standpoint, but in a like. They made some really important films. They clearly do not like women, and maybe we can respect their films and their legacy of their films without like caring about them. That's how I feel.
I really don't like Hitchcock.
Yeah, that's
by the way. Yeah, this is going to be. People are going to be pissed at me. Don't tweet me. I don't care.
I don't think anybody's going to care.
I hope not.
Okay, so let's talk about the 2018 one. That's one I really want to talk about because that one is fucking crazy. I'm going to put this out here up top. I do have rose-colored glasses when it comes to Dakota Johnson because I have like a fucking huge, insane crush on her.
And she's magical in this film.
So good at like
so good.
The performance. Like, let's just break it down. The performances in this film from everyone, frankly, are stunning. Like everybody in these movies in this movie is so good. It's so good. And yeah, so the acting in it, A+.
Yep.
I also like we read that one article from her.
That interviewing. I loved what she had to say on it.
Me too. Like she had this one. Oh God, I have to find it in my notes because she had a quote
note here
that I was just like, hell yeah. The two things that she said that I really appreciated is that the one she said the film speaks about some pretty substantial concepts, which are the power of women, the number of women that exist in a singular woman. I think there are 40 women in the cast. In each one of them, there are 1 million women. I find that in myself, and that's okay. Which I think is like a very like...
We contain multitudes.
Yeah. thing to say, but also thinking about that in terms of the movie, not only... is a cast of 40 women and 3 Tilda Swintons, but it is a
Oops,
movie.
all Tildas.
Oops, all Tildas. But it is a movie that's literally about, it is like weirdly almost a coming of age story, but also like inside me there are different things. I'm not just this girl who was raised in a Mennonite family. I'm not just a good dancer. I'm not just like...
You can have myriad identities, and I think that this really does sing those praises.
Yeah, and especially thinking about like the 3 mothers or whatever. And I didn't do a lot of research about the 3 mothers in terms of what happens in those 2 other movies. But I did do research into kind of like what Mother Suspiriorum means in this movie and then how I interpret personally what Mother Suspiriorum is and how I am making up what I think the other 2 are like because that was more interesting to me.
Yeah, totally.
Especially because the other 2 movies didn't sound very exciting. Because like, I know I keep referencing Hellraiser, but I just think that episode is really... what I learned in that episode and this, like the gooiness and stuff, really applies here. But that's also like kind of how I feel about the Cenobites, like in 1 and 2. I don't want them to be bad guys, actually.
Right.
It is more interesting that they are morally gray. And that is how I feel about this movie. I think it's more interesting that like actual Mother Susperiorum is morally gray, and like so I'm kind of pushing that on the other two. And maybe I'm just thinking about this because I just reread and watched The Sandman, but it like has an endless feel to it. Like, I'm not good, I'm not bad, I just exist.
Yeah, your alignment is true neutral.
This power exists, and sometimes it manifests in horrific and horrifying ways, and sometimes it manifests in love. And that was the other quote that she had that I really like, where she said, "The core of this film is love. If you watch it again with that in mind, it might make a whole world of sense to you."
Yeah.
And I really like that idea of it.
I really like that. I also pulled a Dakota Johnson quote from that, which was, I think a mother could be sort of genderless. And I really think that applies here as well, of like, especially the context of this, we're talking about femininity, we're talking about women, we're talking about, you know, this very like specific part of the binary, right? Mm-hmm. But that multitudes, that messiness, that true neutrality, that, you know, benevolent and malevolent and, you know, truly just kind of an agent of chaos, or, you know, just seeing how the story plays out, I do think plays into that idea of a mother can still be a mother and still be genderless. We can all contain genders and not contain genders. I thought it was really insightful for her to say that. I just thought that was really pretty fantastic. And I really think, kind of like what you're saying with the Cenobites, like the women in this film are almost anti-heroes, or at least her and Madame Blanc, I think. Because like obviously like they're protagonists insofar as the main character, but like they're problematic in a lot of ways. Like they have very like Hamlet kind of journeys of like containing conflict and, you know, being like not being like, ooh, I'm going to join the coven of witches and I'm going to become the head witch. Like it's not American Horror Story Coven where everybody's just slapping each other around trying to be the
like
supreme
vying for politics. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there is like this hardcore evil faction of the coven that is more directly related to how the coven exists in the 1977 one. Like Helena Marcos is evil. That one article called her a steampunk Freddy Krueger, which is the funniest thing I've ever read in my entire life.
The glasses, truly.
But she is like actual evil, and the women who vote for her in the like coven politics have aligned themselves with the like true evil, right? Whereas Madame Blanc is still like a fucking monster. Like she perpetuates like horrible like bodily crimes onto her students, but she has like this gray morality to her where she does it. Whereas like Helena Marcos does it because she wants power and she wants like wealth, and
she'll do it by any means.
Right. And there is this idea that like, I don't know if it's just in the 1977 one or if it's also in this one, that she is unable to have like children. Like she can't procreate. She can't.
That's the vibe. I think based on all that.
So her like function, quote unquote, as a woman is like taken away from her. So now she like needs power and money and like whatever.
Very
and, like,
quote unquote male thing.
Right. So that's you know, that's the like whole castration argument or whatever.
Right.
So like they fall in line with the like true evil, the like frankly like the parody of witches, like of what like
the film The Witches.
Yeah, like the mythos and stuff of like that part of the coven is the parody, right? And then Madame Blanc, and then her like star pupil, her like protege, who like the tables turns like who's actually the pupil here, but like she operates in that morally gray area where I think she genuinely wants to do what's best for the coven because she like genuinely cares about the women and the family and the school. She has
that whole scene in the kitchen where she's like, how many more girls are we going to sacrifice this month?
Yeah.
And you know, she's sitting there with glasses on, like a little pince-nez, and like she's got her newspaper open. She's like, ugh. How many more girls are we going to sacrifice this month? Like, as if, like, who's going to hang up the laundry?
Yeah, she's like, we'll do it. Like, I'll do it. I'm here to, like, make sure that our school survives and our coven survives. I'll do whatever it takes. And, like, that's also alluded to because this 2018 one is set in 1977, but also keeps the, like, politics of the time really as part of the character. And there's, like, a line where somebody says, well, the Marcos Dance School was like open during the war still. And so the idea that like Madame Blanc specifically will do anything to protect her coven, to protect this school, and she's probably done some bad shit, like especially considering like how fucking into witchcraft and the occult Nazis were, right? Like,
and also thinking about the timeline, she would have been about Susie's age at the time of the war.
Right. And she's clearly very powerful because like she is the one, because Helena Marcos can't like, she can still do magic and shit, but she's like stuck in her steampunk Freddy Krueger chair and she's like literally falling apart. Like they need to find a vessel, right? So she has limitations. So then Madame Blanc becomes she becomes the hands.
Right.
But she's the one that's actually like working with the students, making their cover viable, but also like believes in the art and like how dance is used for their rituals and things. So like she's the one that's keeping the school alive, but Helena Marcos is just like
the face,
or is the matriarch, or like she's the
wrinkly Freddy Krueger.
She's the established whatever, right? So yeah, it's really interesting because she clearly has a heart and cares, but she is still willing to sacrifice people to protect her own shit.
Right. Correct.
So she's still a bad person that does bad things, even if she's doing that for a
good reason, the quote unquote right reason.
Right.
You know, things like that.
And like if she finds somebody that like can fit into their coven, like she'll bring them in and like, you know, I won't use your entrails as part of my dance sacrifice. Or
Not
whatever.
this time, I guess.
Not this time. Maybe next.
I have a note here that has been kind of sticking out, especially because you touched on it a little bit, but this idea of like European fear-mongering and propriety and kind of like decency and, you know, very like the right way to do things, and this kind of fear around witchcraft, but also this Nazism that played very much into witchcraft and the occult. Like we've seen this storyline through the ages.
It's literally in Supernatural.
It's literally in fucking everything having to do with
Dean
Nazism.
Winchester kills Hitler.
But this idea of like these conservative ideals are upheld by things like ballet. Ballet is definitely one of those conservative art form, not conservative insofar as like right wing. I mean, is like it is so proper, but it's also
think about how much ballet is tied to regimes, right? Like think about how it's tied to Nazism, like all of the Russian ballet stuff, like that regiment, that control over female bodies, female spaces, like there is obviously ballet can be transgressive, but the history and it is easily used as a tool of like totalitarianism and patriarchy.
Correct. And I think it's really interesting that here we are at the end of the 70s. We're in 77, and it's giving way to this much sexier, more visceral art movement. We've got Bauhaus stuff that's coming out. You know, this is pre-fall of the Berlin Wall, but it's still, we're in the middle of the Cold War.
They're literally right next to the wall.
Yes, they're right up against the wall.
It like truly feels like they did some kind of witchcraft to stop the wall from like going
right through the academy.
Yeah, truly to be like, we're not going to be on that side. We're going to do some kind of fucking magic to make sure that we're on the quote right side or whatever.
Right. Which I thought was just super, super fascinating. And all of that being said, this version in 2018, they choose modern dance instead of ballet.
I love the haptics and the diegetic experience of this movie. Like the soundtrack of the first one is iconic and is stunning and is honestly one of the best parts of that whole movie because it does have that supernatural disorienting feel. But there is something so ancient and primal about hearing people breathe while they move and the way that their body sounds when they hit the floor or they hit themselves. And like that's a huge thing in modern dance, right? Like the lines that your body creates, the like kind of ugliness of it, the sound of it, and the fact that when she did her dance and they were for her audition, I love that she had auditions. I'm just like rolling up in the rain.
Yeah, totally.
But then she does this. She tries to put her music on. They're like, no music.
We don't dance to music here.
Right. And they were like being assholes and they thought that they had power over her. And she was like, all right, fuck it. I grew up in like fucked up Mennonite household. This is not the worst thing that's happened to me.
No formal training. So
yeah. And then she does like, she really lets her breath guide her and it becomes this very even though it was only one person, it was very choral and like Greek and like the sound of it. That's honestly one of my favorite parts of the whole movie is the audition scene.
Yeah.
And like how also Madame Blanc can feel her presence and like literally like fucking witch jumps from like one room to the next. Like, 'cause she's like, I have to see this. I can feel it.
Right.
Like, what does this feel like? I can hear it. I can feel her body move in my space. That is super cool. And to have the modern dance, like even the Volk, when they perform it and they're in costume and makeup and there is music, the music's not loud enough to cover the sound of that many bodies moving that way and breathing that way. And
that's synchronized.
Right.
It's fascinating.
And modern dance itself has a really abject nature to it where it's like,
Correct.
your body shouldn't move this way. That's not a pretty line to make. That's a weird noise to make. That's like you're putting all of the like grossness out there and trying to tell me that it's like art or whatever, you know?
It's the exact opposite of ballet, but almost in the sense of like a circle where ballet is here and then we go all the way around and modern is right next to it.
Yeah. And it's like insanely hard too, right?
Yes.
It's like, so it's not like they choose an easier dance form. It's just, it's hard in a different way, but it really, and especially thinking about them using dance and music and that haptics as magic, like, you know, we danced under the moonlight and that's how we summon the devil to fuck us or whatever. Like that is a huge part of like the mythos of mythology is dance and is that like not a rigidity of a dance, but that like the releasing and the swaying and the keening.
Yeah, keening. Yeah, that's a great word for it.
And that like the fear of like letting a woman like exist in her body, right?
Yeah. And exist in that, like you're saying, in that kind of gross way, in that like really like...
It's not pretty.
It's not pretty, but in a way we're seeing all of these bodies move like that and it becomes very beautiful and very moving in those ways. So I just thought it was a really powerful artistic choice for them to go with modern instead of going with ballet. And the fact that...
And it feels very German, too.
1,000%.
To be like...
Especially those
like
rope dresses.
Well, and the like the type of art that happened in Germany when the wall was up, too.
Yes.
Like,
that is very much what was happening at the time. And I mean, we still see those influences, obviously, today. But I just also think that it was really amazing that they chose to highlight so much of the dance and so much of the movement and how vital it was to the coven. Whereas like in Suspiria, it was like, we happened to be at a dance academy. And we had one dance scene, you know?
The dance is our cover still because like why would all of these women be living together? That's dangerous. We can't have all of these women together without male supervision. Oh, it's a dance? That's women's work, right? Like it's a perfect cover, but then it also is necessary for the type of magic that they do. And we see that happen in the final scene when they're doing the Sabbath dance. Like it is still like they're dancing.
Yeah,
they're
full
moving.
tilt. Yeah.
Like they teach these puppets to do the dance they need.
I mean,
for
the statue of all the bodies that like unfurls. I was like, oh, that's so amazing.
So it is both the perfect cover, but then, you know, it's the vampire who runs the blood bank. Like it is what they need to run their, to do their rituals. But also like I specifically love, so I'm obsessed with like stories that have to deal with math because I'm actually quite bad at math and I mythologize people who are good at it. But I've lately read a bunch of fiction stuff where like magic is equated with math.
Yeah.
And I think choosing modern dance and all of the angles and stuff that they made and the grid on the floor and also the history, like the thing of a pentagram, right? That is a type of math. And like, you know, people talk about like ley lines and like there is a history of math in magic and math in witchcraft and
that
like
alchemical kind of thing.
Yeah. And so I think modern dance specifically really works for that alchemical nature of it and visually really... I just loved that part of it. It is such a, like, all of it worked for me. Like, the haptics, the, like, visuals, the, like, the history of it, the math of it. Like, even to the point in one of my notes, if, like, you go on the Patreon and read my watch notes, like, there is a point, you know, what's her friend? Sarah. Sarah's not there at the beginning of the dance because she broke her leg because she was getting too nosy. And in my notes, I was like, but the math won't be right. How can you do the magic? Because she's supposed to be there.
She's
the
supposed
math's
to be
wrong.
there. Yep. And I think that like the coven also realizes. And
Which is why they heal her and they're like, get the fuck out there.
Yep.
We need you for the math.
Yep.
And to the point where like then Dakota Johnson, Susie apologizes to Madame Blanc and is like, sorry, I messed it up. Because she like, you know, makes Sarah fall, I guess, and like realizes that she's being used as a puppet. And then they're like fun to like lesbian telepathy
Lesbian
conversation.
Telepathy. That's the name of my band.
And she's like, sorry, I messed it up. And then Madame Blanc's like, no, you don't understand. And she's like, I think I understand a lot more than you think I do. But yeah, the math was messed up.
The math was messed up. Indeed.
Which I really freaked out about in my notes.
Yeah. I also think with the modern and with the storyline throughout, you know, the relationship between Susie and Madame Blanc and, you know, the relationship between Sarah and Susie, all of this is this idea, this cultivating of both platonic and romantic intimacy and relationships between women without any kind of external influence. It's just kind of letting it happen. And I understand, like, we're operating under a film that is directed by a man. You know, the scripts are like, there are a lot of male hands on this film in particular. But I think in both films, it just was really interesting to kind of let the intimacy be. Like the fact that like Sarah crawls into bed with her when she has a nightmare, those like moments of Madame Blanc holding her hands and like even the platonic intimacy in the absolute horror at the end where, you know, we see Susie going around and, you know, Death. Oh, that was the thing. The actor who played Death was the mother, which I thought like that blew my mind when I was reading that because I've seen this film a million times and I didn't even put that together.
Yeah, I read one article that said, and I don't know if this is true timeline wise, but like I would like to believe it to be true because I think it's better. The moment that her mom dies is like the moment that she becomes like this death, like that she like
it happens
is
at the
called
same
to
time.
it. Like she, like Susie almost like makes it happen.
Summons her.
Right. She summons her, right? Because she's like dying at the beginning, but like we see the back of Susie's head and she's like that age, we think. So she could have left. And like, so the idea of like almost Susie maybe unknowingly, at least at first, keeping her mom alive through her like, you know, witchcraft, but then once she realizes it being like, oh, I'm gonna release you and now use you to be like this avatar
use you as
of
a
death.
puppet now. Yeah. But yeah, I think that intimacy kind of across the board of these like, you know, maternal relationships, these kind of peer relationships, these romantic almost relationships, even in that scene at the end when Death is going around and exploding people. But there's also the moment
Voting
where,
has consequences.
Correct. When she goes around and is talking to Olga and Patrizia and Sarah and says, what do you want? What can I give you? Placing her hand on their faces. And they just say like, please just release me. And that level of like intimacy and love.
Yeah.
From that. And a lot of people really fucking hate the end of this film.
Yes. That is definitely a thing I want to talk about because I think it is very easy and justifiable in many ways to be like, this film thinks it's feminist, but actually does a lot of work of reinforcing a negative female stereotype through the like idea of a witch. Because at the end, like Susie becomes a witch and she still like is running the coven and has like wiped some memory. And like, I think the problem here is that like we don't actually get to see what kind of Mother Suspiriorum she's going to be, right? Like we get hints of it, but like we don't actually know. And so I think in a lot of articles I read, they are kind of equating this new Mother Suspiriorum to the Helena Marcos one and being like, oh, well, she's still like
perpetuating all of that.
Right. And while that is maybe true in many ways, I think intention here is very important, right? Like Helena Marcos wasn't the mother of size, right?
No, and she
like,
never had good intentions whatsoever, just self-serving ones.
Right. She had it was just about her and her power, and she used the women around her in her coven who are supposed to be her daughters and her family. She manipulated them. It's like the quote that the psychiatrist says is like, family and manipulation are often like bedfellows, right? Because Sarah's like, no, we're a family. This is my home. And it's like, well, homes can be the most toxic places.
Correct.
But then they can also be, you know, places of like love and support. And so I think that it's really important the differences in intention between the two And I think a lot of articles that hate the ending and critics who hate the ending are just like, no, it still positions women as being like evil and there's no like moral compass here. And like even, you know, there's like this gray area, blah, blah, blah. But like the gray area is the point, I think. Like again,
the moral gray area, yeah.
Right. Again, I am thinking about the at least the three mothers in my brain that I've made up because I refuse to watch the other ones, of thinking of them as like they are neither good or bad. They exist. Of course, death just exists. Like sighs and grief just exist.
Right.
Darkness just exists.
Right.
Like,
we don't have to qualify it by categorizing it as good or bad.
There are bad things about all of those things. There are important and good things about all of those things. And I think because Susie is the actual Mother Suspiriorum, she has, like, thinking about grief and sighs and stuff, like there is a mercy in it and there is love in it. And that, I think that scene of her going up to all of those women and not making the choice for them, not being like, I'm going to kill you now. Literally asking them and like, because like I don't know what her powers are. Theoretically,
if she can explode people, she could probably bring people back from the dead.
Theoretically, if like one of them was like, I want to join the coven and worship with you, like theoretically, she could bring them back to life in a different way. Like we don't know. So giving them the agency when throughout the entire film, their agency has been completely...
Right. I mean, even like the Sabbath, when they wake up and they're like, they have no recollection of it. They all think it's a nightmare. Like no agency in those regards. But I think that Mother Suspiriorum in Susie's incarnation of it does have mercy.
Right. I think that is difficult to parse too, because like she has mercy and she releases the three and lets them die. She only kills the people that voted for Helena Marcos because they like were like, you were given the chance to like not be shitty. And then like, and also like I think the act of wiping the memory of the dancers and then making the actual coven doing all of the cleaning and stuff is a type of punishment, right? Like you literally have to clean up this mess you made. I didn't kill you. We're starting from scratch, but you have to be responsible and clean up this mess you made. I think that's important. And like, maybe I'm pie in the sky, but I like to believe that she wiped the memories of the dancers as an act of mercy, so they didn't have to see all that stuff. But I think that she will. I think that she will bring them into the coven. She has to rebuild her coven.
Right.
They're already there. And so she can like slowly let them in on it and like clear their, memory and be like, all this fucked up shit happened. But like now, because she exploded like 2/3 of her coven. She has to like rebuild it, right? And they're already there. And like, why not bring in these women who had their agency and stuff taken away. And then if they refuse, I'm going to use their body for sacrifice, Yeah. I mean, blood of the bloodline, Like, but I, as Stella Cheeks, have to believe that they are at least given a choice.
Yeah.
Because it feels like very in...
It's like the dawning of a new age. It's new. We're under new management here.
We're under new management. Do you think Madame Blanc lives? Because she gets her head pez back on,
and then you see her eyes shift too. You see her eyes look over. I do think the first time I watched it, I did think that she survived. Yeah. I do think she does survive in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I think like Susie doesn't bring her back right away because it is still like part of the punishment. But like, and also like, those three girls existed in a half-life for so long. Like they had things perpetuated to their bodies that should have killed them, but they were left alive with magic. And I think like Madame Blanc should have died, but the fact that maybe she was kept alive in like a torturous like state of being, even if Mother Suspiriorum brings her back fully, like that is also a punishment.
Correct.
Like you are,
and we see that in witchcraft a lot,
right? And I'm not saying that Mother Suspiriorum is not going to do any of the like bad like shit. Like she's still a witch. Like again, she's bad and good. Like she still needs grief and shame. She even says that. Like she says it to that guy. Like I don't need yours, but like she still needs it. She still needs the viscera and stuff for the magic, but I think that she's going to have a lot more like intention, right? Like that's the point to me, at least.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's like, and when Dakota Johnson says like, I think this movie is actually like a lot about love and like the fucked up crazy things we do for love and the people that we love. Even her mother and the Mennonite thing, like she like abuses her child, but she does it in a twisted form of like maternal love.
Right.
Because she thinks if I can burn the sin out of you, then I will be protecting you because it's my job as this like Christian household to like raise you properly. So like, and that is also a very maternal thing where it's like,
it's the mother wound big time, especially like thinking about Dakota opening her chest at the end. Like that is
her like perverse Virgin Mary, like the heart of the Virgin Mary.
Yeah. I mean, that is like the mother wound, right?
Yeah.
Like that we all have some form of that or another. It's like, I remember a line from a musical that's like, your mother's love may seem insane because she really knows everything. And it's like, I think that kind of encompasses like this idea of containing multitudes and this idea of like needing grief, needing shame, needing like embarrassment and panic and horror and blood and viscera. Like we need these things in order to understand our existence.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's very easy to write it off as like, ugh. But also at the same time, in many ways, it doesn't work. I'm doing a lot of mental gymnastics here.
Oh, totally.
Right?
We're doing so much deep diving that may not even exist.
In many ways, like the director of this one, whose last name I can't pronounce, whatever, he said, if we talk about the great mother, we cannot deny the terrible mother. True feminism is something that doesn't shy away from the complexity of the female identity. First of all, it's exhausting to hear a man, I don't care that he's gay, talk about true feminism. But I think that's part of the way that this movie fails is because he, as a director, is still really thinking in a dichotomy. So like he's not doing a straight virgin horror like dichotomy, but like to have, you know, the great mother and the terrible mother.
Right.
So if
that
Helena,
binary,
right,
that, yeah.
Helena Marcos is the terrible mother and Susie's the great mother. Like that is also not complex, and that is also really boring and not,
it's not fully fleshed out.
right. And it doesn't serve the story. And I think that's part of the reason why to get to a place where we are getting it, you do have to like do a lot of mental gymnastics.
Look at how many things we read. Look at how much we're talking about. Like we are doing a lot of mental gymnastics. And I do think that, you know, quote unquote, good or bad, right? We're talking about a dichotomy, good or bad films, like spark a lot of conversation. But I do think that, yeah, it is a failure because it just doesn't quite like, we're getting a little bit of blue balls on it, you know, to use like a very,
which is exhausting to think of because it's already 2.5 hours long. But it's like,
it's an hour longer than the original. It's insane.
I almost need more.
Yeah.
But it's also too long already.
Right.
I don't know if it's actually too long, but like it doesn't.
It feels like it has a couple false endings from my perspective
right.
of it. Like, and also from a cinematic viewpoint, like I get that this is his first horror film. For being a first horror film, I think he captured a lot of incredible tone.
Yeah,
and a lot
I
of
like
incredible
that
horror moments.
I like the way that it's filmed, like just from like an actual film perspective. I like that it actually feels like it is a movie made in the 70s, set in the 70s.
Pre-Fall of the Berlin Wall.
Right. Yeah. And I think Bobby said it because it was shot on film. It wasn't like any digital.
Yeah.
And you can feel that. And that is really important, especially if we're thinking of this as like an homage. Because like the way they did so much like film tricks and like dyeing of film, like Technicolor and stuff, like how they used, even in 1977, they used old school film tricks to make it look a certain way. And in
the Wizard of Oz trick.
Yeah. And in 2018, they used old school film tricks to make it feel a certain way. Right. And I think that really adds to the like visceral nature of it.
And I think the part where the film loses me, both story-wise and cinematography-wise, is that Sabbath bloodbath at the end. Because all of a sudden, we cut, everything is this weird kind of slow-mo, like trails. Everything is rotoscoped red. It shifts entirely tonally from the rest of the film. And when I originally watched it and I thought back and I was like, oh man, I loved everything up until that point. I remember just being like, this scene feels comical. Like this feels laughable because of how it's shot.
It's not scary.
It's not.
At all. And I'm like dancing around it because I don't want to talk about it. But like the contortion scene is like one of the hardest things I've ever watched in my life.
I'm
and like
so sorry
truly
I put
like
you through that. Are you mad at me?
No, I'm not. I was like I couldn't look away. It was truly like watching a train wreck. I literally had my hands on my face and I was like shrinking into myself.
She had her first horror thing on level.
Yeah. I'm like truly like who knows? I might by the time this comes out, I might have had a nightmare.
No.
But like yeah, it was a lot. But it wasn't a lot for no reason, right?
Right. It had intention behind it.
Right. And so, like, I was nervous about the ending because I was like, literally, how could this get worse?
Yeah.
Because that is, again, one of the worst things I've ever seen. And then you're right. It has this really tonal shift where, like, all of the other.
It doesn't even feel like it's part of the same movie.
Right. It doesn't. It feels like a man's fantasy of what a witch's ritual would be.
Right.
It
Right.
must contain blood because these bitches are always bleeding.
Yeah. Under the full moon.
They're definitely making weird, like, keening
it's
noises.
also a full moon right now,
They're
which is weird too.
fully covered in women, in like other people's hair. One person is wearing a caftan, but everybody else is naked. There's definitely at least one dude there just like sad and naked on the floor because like
he's a sacrificial lamb.
right. Well, it's not even that they wanted him to be a witness because, like, does the ritual even exist if a man is not there to witness it?
Bear shit in the woods. I'm gonna get so much hate mail. No.
So yeah, I agree. Like, I really do love the film until the Sabbath scene because it then does even the way that like Helena Marcos is talking. Like, this woman comes in this like truly like bitch and sheer caftan, which I like because like a bunch of people that I read were like, oh, it's just over sexualized, and I was like, I actually don't think there's anything sexual about that caftan.
It looked agender to me.
Yeah,
like, it was genderless.
It truly felt like, oh my, this is just my body. I don't know. Right. But then we get like God bless Tilda Swinton, but then we get this like comedy monster monologue.
Yeah,
we get steampunk Freddy Krueger being like, I'm gonna take your body, little girl, and it's like, okay,
absolutely.
But like, what if she's turned around?
Because all of the horror that we've seen up until now, even the body horror, even that contortion scene, which is, as you said, incredibly horrific, then we see the monster. You know, like we always talk about in horror, like it is scarier to have the idea of the monster, the shadow of the monster. The anticipation is way scarier. And when they reveal the monster, you're like, oh, it's not so bad. It's our imaginations do all of the work for us. When they reveal Helena Marcos in that regard, even in this 1977 one, we see bits and pieces of her. We see her when she's dead. That's all we see.
Right. Because we see the like outline of her, and then Susie's like, oh, that's where the ghost is.
But then when we see Helena Marcos, like Helena Marcos has been built up this entire fucking time. We have heard whispers of her. We have not seen her. And we walk into this big Sabbath. Everybody's having a fucking shit show of a time. Tilda's freaking out. Oh, Tilda over here is sitting in a chair. She's decrepit. She's melting. She's got these stupid glasses on. And it's just like...
She looks like... Yeah, it's like...
The buildup of it was... She literally is an afterthought. She's on the screen left side. She's an afterthought. And she looks comical. I don't care how good the prosthetics in this film are because they are incredible because Tilda played an old man. But we look at that and I'm like, this is so far out of the world of this film. And then we go into the Sabbath scene.
And then she gives a villain. Different. She gives a James Bond villain monologue. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you're going to do. You can't escape it. Mwahahaha.
Yeah.
Like, the only thing missing is, like, she didn't leave the room and then, like, there wasn't, like, a daring escape. It was just like, oh, no, I'm just going to fucking...
And a shark pit with laser beams.
Right. But maybe Helena Marcos has one. I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised. It is
like,
steampunk Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, and yes, like, technically the prosthetic of Helena Marcos was good, but it also, like, she looked like a cartoon character. She looked like fucking, like, a Mojo-verse, like, villain. She, like, she is steampunk Freddy Krueger, or she's, like, Mojo from the Mojo-verse in fucking X-Men, and that is not a compliment.
No, and for how much effort they put into all of the body horror and all of the prosthetics and all of the work that they put in, it just cheapened the ending so hard. And the fact that the costume department
had to clean blood out of the real hair every night for like a week.
God bless the costume department on this.
Costume department.
Man, and the set and art department on this, because that was not an easy feat.
Yeah, it sucks to do all of that work and all of that heavy lifting to get to the final climatic scene and have it be like a weird comedy. And there's like still good acting in it. Like when Tilda as Madame Blanc is like, there is something wrong here, actually. Like that is a
have to stop.
Good moment. And like her transformation from like wearing her like very utilitarian, this is what I wear as a dance teacher, to like, this is my ritual outfit, like that, you know.
We get to see the real her and
and
it cheapened her moment as well. And I think that you actually do really care for Madame Blanc as it goes along.
I was happy when her head got Pez dispenser back on, and I was like, oh, good.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I think that reveal of Helena Marcos and this big ritual just really cheapened that storyline. It highlighted Susie. We love that. But everyone else who was so vital to creating this coven and creating this world just was so shirked to the side.
That scene doesn't work. And even the death coming out and exploding people's heads.
That's where I started laughing.
I like that
the first time I watched this film.
Death comes out and kills all of the people who voted for Helena Marcos. And I liked how they did it where
Marcos.
And that also felt very Gestapo-y, the way that was filmed.
Yeah.
So that I think made a lot of sense, but
especially because they've got the brick walls behind them. Yeah, good point.
But then having a death monster point at them and their heads explodes is
it was comical.
It's fucking dumb.
Yeah, literally. I laughed.
You don't have a head, and you don't have a head, and then just crawl back into the basement. I was I guess hell is in the sub-basement.
I guess death just lives in our sub-basement then. Can you bring up a case of beer? I laughed at Helena Marcos, and I laughed as soon as the death stuff started happening, and that was where I was just man. There were so many beautiful visual elements and so many things that really did kind of beef up the plot in a way that was captivating, and it just shit the bed at the end.
Yeah, that scene sucks until I think the moment of mercy.
Yeah.
When frankly...
And people talk about how that is a cheap moment in that scene. I'm the scene was cheap and it cheapened that moment because,
right. I think that moment is incredibly important.
Yeah.
But in the midst of everything. And I know a lot of people don't like when she stands up on the diocese and then all the other girls are still dancing. And then she says it's beautiful, it's beautiful. I like that moment because that feels like an actual moment of rebirth. And especially because we have that line where Madame Blanc is art can't be beautiful anymore.
Yeah.
It has to punch you in the nose. It has to be this aggressive thing. And then to have Mother Suspiriorum be it's beautiful. This abject horror is beautiful.
Right.
It's almost it almost once she takes away all of the comedic bullshit weird elements of it, and then it's just women dancing in the blood, and then it's no, I fixed it. I fixed it. We're good.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it happened. I do wish that death had just come around and touched them and they fell and maybe they're bleeding out of their mouths and that's where all the blood comes from, not this explosion.
Yeah, that was too much.
Not the pyrotechnics of blood.
That was too much. Yeah, especially I don't need to see that magic. That's part of the reason why the contortion scene is so powerful is because she's in a room alone.
And how they shot that in a mirrored room without giving away camera, my God.
I don't know how they shot any of that scene.
That was phenomenal.
Yeah. But that woman is not only, she's a part of a dance studio, she's a part of a coven, she's a part of a family, and then she's not. She is alone. Olga, I think her name is. Yeah. She's alone. And then her body is doing it against her will. We see Madame Blanc activate, I don't know, Dakota Johnson, Susie, and then Susie's doing the dance and so we know how it's happening, but we don't see it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what makes it even more scary. And
right.
and putting yourself in Olga's shoes, Olga doesn't know what the fuck is happening.
And she has no control.
She just tried to leave and she can't. And that not knowing and that loss of control versus I point at you and your head explodes, that is cheap magic.
Correct. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think that it is out of the realm of this coven's practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why did that one lady stab herself in the throat? What was her deal?
Wait, which one?
The one with the glasses and the weird vibe?
Oh.
The other witch at the when they were kind of in the back scene in the kitchen table. Yeah.
I have never known the answer to this, and it didn't
come up in any of the things that we read.
It doesn't come up at all in any of the things that we read. I think that the only thing that would make sense to me is that this woman is having such a nervous breakdown about the morals and ethics of this coven that she cannot. Cannot escape. A, we've seen what happens to people who try to escape, and B, her only way out is her choice.
Right.
So that would be truly the only reason that I could see.
Which is that moral gray area around not that this is a Hamlet story, but have the Hamlet thing. My only escape might be suicide.
Right.
Which is also a horror in and of itself.
I could be wrong, so I'll go back and I'll look at this. But when we see her in those, I think only 2 scenes before she tries to off herself.
While other magic is happening. I believe she was a Blanc vote. Yeah.
And she's always shot looking very diminutive and nervous. So, leading credence to what you just said, I think she feels the coven going the wrong way, knows you're in a fucking witch coven. It's not like you could just leave.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, also that tying into the politics of the time
you can't
is a
leave.
huge thing.
You can't leave.
You literally can't leave the country. You can't leave that side of the city, you know?
Or like even going back, like if you're a member of like the Nazi party, you can't just leave, right?
Right.
Like you can't, you're trapped in whatever, you make a choice and you're trapped.
Yep.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that it fails, going back to the second article that I talked about before, the appropriating the abject, I really like the article because like they really break down Kristeva's argument of what like abject horror is, especially when it comes to women, and they talk about Barbara Creed stuff in The Monstrous Feminine, and they like really do give a lot of credit to this film of like, here are all the things that it's trying to do, kind of like we did.
Right.
Here, here is the compelling story it's telling. It is trying to tell a different and more nuanced story than the 1977 one, which is literally just a good, bad fairy tale.
Right.
And this is trying to talk about the complexities of, feminine nature and the complexities of like the politics of the time and how that's mirrored. And it's like doing so much, but ultimately it fails. Because, I mean, Kristeva's argument is that you can't redeem abjectness. Like, you can't make it good. And because the simplicity of, like, the directors, there's a terrible mother and a great mother. So, like, I'm trying to use a Sabbath bloodbath as a good thing. And it's not
a redemption.
As a redemption arc. And, like, giving the coven a redemption arc, but also there's still witches who are going to prey on people and who are going to do magic, and like whether or not that is good or bad, it just exists. But they're trying to position it in a redeemable way, and like it's an irredeemable thing. Sure. Instead of just like being like in like a queer theory or like Foucaultian way, being like, we don't exist in that society anymore.
Right,
the only way that we can be abject or like have power in that is if we take ourselves completely out of it. So you can't be this good witch but still be a part of society where all of the things that you're doing as a witch are still fucking bad.
Right.
So that's where the conflict is like, for how much they don't want to be telling a good bad story, they are still following into the trope of good bad, but like still trying to be like, isn't this cool and good? And it's like, it's still horrific.
Yeah.
And I don't need there to be a winner or a good bad thing. That's why I say like, I like the idea of it like, it just exists, right?
There's this quote here from Kelsey Stoller on the Bustle article, and she says, and considering that stories like this have been made about men for decades, it's actually a pretty big deal that alongside stories of feminist triumphs and unyielding heroines, women can also see themselves as somewhat murky, gray, and undefined as the world of Suspiria too.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, this film tries not to fall into some sort of morality tale, but also looking at horror in general, horror does have a tendency to, whether it means to or not, fall on a this group is good, this group is bad. Right.
Which is like going way back to when I talked about Reanimator, that's part of the thing I fucking loved about it is that it wasn't like Monstrous Feminine, but it exists in that monstrous world where like at the end of the movie, Dan and Herbert don't survive the monster and like stop being transgressive. They're like, no, we're still going to definitely do this. We'll just do this somewhere else.
Right, it's like Frankenstein.
Right. It is absolutely Frankenstein, right? Like, I mean, it literally is.
That's literally what it's based on.
But they don't go through the arc of like, well, we are trying to be, I really should have like re-upped that reading.
We didn't know we were going to get this far in the weeds.
We're living in this monstrous world, we're fighting this monstrous world, but at the end we've defeated the monster and now we exist back in society. Like in Reanimator, that doesn't happen, right? Like we created the monster, we're fighting the monster, fuck society, goodbye. Like consequences, who is she? But that's part of the reason I like that is because like there is no, society isn't important there. Whereas in this movie, it kind of fails because it's almost positioning Susie as like, they both want her to exist in that abject nature and that like we're still part of the monster. I'm still like Herbert West playing with my like cadavers. I'm still a witch who's doing rituals and shit. But they also want her to be a final girl who has escaped the horror.
Right.
Like they want her to be Susie.
They want that mother or the Madonna and the Virgin dichotomy.
Right. They want her to have
What am I saying?
survived. They want her to be a final girl, but they also want her to still exist and like own the abject horror, like, and own the like power and whatever. But like they kind of can't exist at the same time. You have to just choose.
And they're trying
one.
to couch it in this like we contain multitudes
Right.
argument.
And they're also kind of like almost couching it as like a political statement too, with all of the political stuff in the background. And then also the scene where she goes to the psychiatrist at the end and is like, hey, sorry that they did that to you. I'm here to make apologies for that. That was pretty embarrassing.
Sorry.
Especially when he's like yelling at the ground. He's like, there are evil men in this country. I'm not one of them. That was pretty powerful. And then she's like, here, let me tell you how your wife died. This is kind of like this beautiful act of mercy and like an apology. But then she takes all of his memories away. And like, what are we without our memories? What are we without our like dreams? What are we without our shames?
How is that an act of mercy? And
Right.
are they trying to frame it that way?
Is it like Mother Suspiriorum doesn't understand? Like that's how she thinks of mercy? Like I'll just take it all away because she like can't equate herself to humanity
But we
anymore?
see her earlier going, what can I give you? What do you want to those women?
To those women, though. That's different.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's so interesting because it can be, it's like a violent act of mercy.
I mean, both of those things. I
Right.
think what she does for the women when she
She's-
releases them and what she does to Klemperer, it's, yeah.
Yeah, she's still like a primordial being full of all of this power. She can't do just a good thing. It still has a violent nature to it. So it's like violent mercy. Yeah, I don't know. It's very complex. But Dakota Johnson is very good at this movie.
Yes, she is. And so is Tilda Swinton, except in the Monster Mash.
Yeah.
Melting ham in sunglasses outfit.
Frida Krueger.
Frida Krueger.
I can't.
Frida Krueger.
Oh my
Wow.
God. Wow.
Wow. Well, I'm exhausted talking about
I'm
witches.
so tired. We went in.
It is like an exhausting like thing to kind of talk about. Do you have any other like closing thoughts?
I mean, we really did exhaust the list of everything that I had.
Yeah, I would really suggest people go read that. I'll link it, but the appropriating the abject. I think that is really interesting. I think it really nails how I feel about this movie, where it's like, I see what they're trying to do. In many ways, I accept what they're trying to do, and I will do the mental gymnastics to get there. But here is why it fails.
Right. Yep.
Though that article also really talks about that line. I think that's what it feels like to fuck an animal or whatever. And they're like, but bestiality is bad. And I was like, that's not what that line was
That's literally
supposed to
not
mean.
what that.
That's not what that line was. But like, if you can ignore that,
Yeah.
it's good. But also, like, I don't know, at the end of the day, maybe female stories should be directed and written by females. I think a lot of the problems here probably would have been solved. Not that like females or women are like perfect or whatever, but like you just can't. Again, that final Sabbath scene feels like what a man thinks a women's like ritual would look like.
Sure.
So, okay. Last thing, we have to do a Peg, Marry, Kill. That's just like an NYD tradition, but it's hard to do one with like a cast of all these women. Oh, you know what? Before we get to this, I do want to say I think a scene that could have been cut and should have been cut because it leads to this like. It leads to the morality questions and also of like women in power and like how witches like are just here to like bring down men or whatever. That like scene where the like women are laughing at the police officers like naked,
yeah.
like ACAB, but also it's
so unnecessary.
The scene is so unnecessary. I guess it like exists to show that like the Marcos people are like pure evil and they're the ones that will castrate your men or whatever, even though they don't. But it's truly unnecessary and really, really blurs. It is an easy thing for everyone to point to and be like, this is why this fails.
Correct.
Because that scene that scene and this part of the Sabbath scene undercut a lot of what the rest of the film does well.
Agreed. Fully agreed.
Yeah. Also, why did Tilda Swinton have to play the psychiatrist?
I think it was just a really great opportunity for her to flex an acting muscle.
I don't know. Was it supposed to be like a commentary on gender or something? I don't know.
Well, I also thought that, this is the only male
Isn't Tilda
character.
Swinton herself a commentary on gender? And like,
oh my God. I think it was just like, this is the one male character that we see throughout the film.
Yeah.
And to have it be played by a woman, I thought was a fascinating take on it. I don't know that it served anything.
I don't think it was necessary. Maybe it does add like more of an air of like mercy. Mercy's not the right word. An air of some kind of like emotional level that maybe they were like, I don't know.
It makes me grasp at straws. That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's what I can't tell you a straight answer as to why this is.
Like, it makes sense, I think, to have her play Marcos and Blanc because they're two sides of a fucked up coin.
And then it's just like, and left field.
And this dude.
Yeah. I don't think.
He's like supposed to be more sympathetic because he's played by a woman? Like, is that what it is? Like, the sympathy engenders, like, is it supposed to like feminize him because he's like older and therefore he's lost like some of his masculinity or something? It's like a weird choice, and it also muddies the water in a way that is completely unnecessary.
Yep.
So there was a story while they were shooting this and I'm sure it's very Hollywood and kind of apocryphal, but it's got quotes from Tilda Swinton and the director and everything. From the time they started shooting to the credits list being listed and everything, the psychiatrist character was not listed as Tilda Swinton. They made up a fake name and a fake bio and said, no, this is a real German psychiatrist. He's never been in an acting role before. They did interviews with him. There's quotes saying that
game.
There's quotes saying that other people in the cast did not know that was Tilda Swinton because of the makeup and everything.
I didn't know it was Tilda Swinton until like you said it, and I was like, what are you talking about? And I looked up and I was like, what? And
it blows your mind.
And then my first response was, why? And my second one was like, oh, damn, Tilda.
Yeah. And when someone asked, after, of course, it got revealed that was Tilda Swinton, someone asked Tilda Swinton, so, like, what did you go into that doing? Like, why would you do all of this and perpetrate this ruse or whatever? And I think, of course, summating it, Tilda Swinton's answer was, because I could.
Because I'm Tilda Swinton. I do what I want.
I'm Tilda fucking Swinton.
I literally do what I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, building off of that, let's do a Peg, Marry, Kill. Let's Peg, Marry, Kill the three Tildas.
Tilda.
Do Frida Kruger. The Doctor. And Madame Blanc. It's the worst Peg, Marry, Kill.
It is
but
one
it's
of the
the most
worst
obvious one.
I mean, I would marry Madame Blanc. For sure. Because just because I married that person doesn't mean I can't bone that person.
Yeah.
I would probably peg the Doctor because, I don't know, that would be kind of funny, I think. And then, of course, I would have to kill Frida Kruger.
Yeah, we're definitely killing Frida Kruger. Like, that's, and not even on like her body's grotesque, but like she's
just a fuckhead.
She's
the worst.
Yeah, I do not want to eat her cunt on a platter. You know, that's a quote, you guys.
I know.
Come on, I watch these films and I have to prove it.
I forgot that was a quote, and she said it, and I was like, oh damn, okay.
Yeah. So kill, but honestly, like, I think I would marry the psychiatrist. I think that he like seemed like he was a good husband. Like, that's kind of like the journey.
Yeah. I was
and
on the
also
fence.
I would be like pretty nervous that Tilda Swinton, or at that, I'm sorry, they're all Tilda Swinton. I would be pretty nervous the whole time that Madame Blanc would just like do some freaky ass witchcraft. So like, if I can like hit it and quit it,
that's
but can I quit it is the answer.
I know. I wish I could quit you.
Peg and what's the P word for leaving? Peace. Can I peg and peace? I don't know if I can peg and peace. I don't.
Blink and bounce.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't. I really can't be contorted.
Yeah, that's the thing is I think that I was on the fence of your answer, and I was like, I don't know.
But is long-term marriage, I guess if I'm just like very deferential. What can I get you today?
I can barely commit to dinner. Like,
but also like cool lesbian telepathy, right? Like,
yeah, that
do I get lesbian
got
telepathy in this marriage? Is that part of the vows?
Oh, come on. Yeah.
Right.
Susie got it and she was just a student. Like, come on.
Yeah. I know that there's like a lot of queer undertones between Susie and Madame Blanc, but I never like, I liked their like familial relationship.
Yeah, it was intimate without being
Right.
sexual or romantic.
I get how some people read it as sexual, and I like support that reading. It's just like, to me, again, like you said, there were like these. It felt like a lot of platonic queer relationships. Like these are still very queer relationships, but they felt like, yeah.
And I think that is a relationship dynamic that is not upheld or highlighted too much in our society. So I think that's where platonic queer relationships, that's the takeaway of this film.
That is the takeaway of this film. That's the positive takeaway of this film. All right. Well, thank you for being on this podcast. Sorry if we got too in the weeds.
No, I was glad to pick it apart because I knew we were going to pick it apart because I don't love these films, but I'm fascinated by these films.
1977. The vibes are like, it's beautiful. The aesthetics, A+. The story, really basic. 2018.
Insane story.
I don't think I both want to watch it again, knowing all of this stuff, and truly do not know if I can ever watch it again. Maybe if I skip that one scene. That scene is horrific.
It's really rough. I'm really sorry. That's probably one of the most gruesome things that you have had to watch yet.
It is 100% the most gruesome thing I've ever seen.
Sorry.
I cannot think of a worse thing that I've seen.
It is called Spooky 30s.
That's true. But a lot of the things that people choose have been like, you know, fun 80s stuff. And even if it's spooky, like The Thing was pretty fucked up. But like, you know, it still had a lot of the stuff even that have been fucked up and visceral and like really exist in this abject horror are still very stylized and prosthetics and like very 80s, and that like the paint blood of like 1977, like the, you know,
candy apple
even
rim.
that like the horrific scene of her like crashing through the ceiling and like being hung, and then like her friend with the glass in the face, like it's all horrific, but it's like,
you know, it's fake.
Right. It looks very fake. It's got the like, you know, the Hannibal vibes, the like, this is like a beautiful macabre art piece. That scene was so fucking visceral, and it looked
It's the crunching too.
It looked real.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how they made it look real.
The angle of the shot of her lying down.
Is she a contortionist? She has to be. How
I
did
think
they
she
do
probably
this?
has some contortion elements, but some of that stuff I was like, physiologically, you cannot get into that position. So I was interested to see what prosthetics they placed
would,
and
like,
how they placed them.
Love to watch a how we filmed this scene, and I could never watch a how we filmed this scene. Like, yeah, that complete loss of control, like,
it's scary.
That is like one of the scariest things I've ever seen. It will be really hard to top that as the scariest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
I win that award.
So, yeah. Whew.
Sorry.
I'm like sweating thinking about it. It's terrific. And then they come
pee on
and
yourself.
they just like,
Huck her down just hook her and huck her.
I think my note was, how can this get worse? I
And
think
then
the
it
worst
did.
part was realizing that she was still alive.
Oh,
that
yeah.
is truly the worst part.
That's the worst part. When you
100%.
When you find out she's still alive and they move her, I was like, oh God.
That is truly the worst part of
That's
that whole
gotta
thing.
be so painful. Anyway.
Anyways, that's been Helena Handbasket, a.k.a. Kato AC,
That's
a.k.a.
me.
go watch her movie on Shudder, Revealer.
Yeah. Also, speaking of a film that is about female storylines that is written and directed by men, which is something that came to mind.
Yeah.
We can unpack that at another time.
I don't think that we should.
No, we're not going to do it right now. At another time.
Another time. Okay, well, why don't you give the people your socials and where they can find you other than the Shudder app?
Yeah, well, you can find me on the Shudder landing page in Revealer, but I am also at the Helena Handbasket or at Kato, CAITOAASE on Instagram. I am only Handbasket on Twitter. And yeah, those are the places you can find me.
And on Internet Movie Database.
And IMDb, baby, I've got
cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. And I've got, I'm in the upcoming horror film Black Mold, which is coming out in 2023. And I'm very excited about that too.
Yeah. A real life scream queen.
Meow.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Goodbye.
The piece will be called Wieder öffnen, open again. Ali.
And now it's time for Nightmare Corner with Stella and Bobby. When did this become like a late night TV show?
I don't know. It's probably because it's my involvement, and this is the part where I talk, so it's got to be schmaltzy. God, my friends are intelligent and well-spoken, and this is going to be a bunch of dick jokes. Hell, you can talk during this.
Hi, I'm Hell.
Yeah, we've had guests stick around and shit, so you can talk about this part too. So,
As of this recording, I don't have any nightmares, but we are recording this early, so theoretically I might have more there might be audio that's playing after me talking right now. But in this moment, I haven't had any nightmares, but I did watch it 2 days ago because I put it off because I was really scared for good reason. But I did have a really wicked, restless night the first time where I was having a hard time falling asleep and having like intrusive thoughts where I was like trying not to think about that scene, and then I would start thinking about that scene as I was trying to fall asleep. So even though I didn't have a traditional nightmare, it still affected the way that I was like existing.
Mm-hmm.
My other question that I've now added on to when we talk about this and how it affected you is, did it affect your eating habits at all?
I ate before I watched this.
But then like no aversion to meat or anything after?
Not in this one.
Okay.
Yeah, but I specifically ate before watching it because I was like, I am worried that I won't be able to eat after this. But I did, right after watching this, go to a boxing class. So I like finished my stress cycle of watching the movie, and then I think I literally had to get out of my head and into my body to like shake that movie off. So I think actually doing a workout, a very physical workout, helped me not exist in that space
We're
anymore.
learning our own horror aftercare.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a
My
really
horror
important
aftercare
thing.
is take a boxing class.
Yeah.
It's like honestly, with any kink, like aftercare is super vital. And like, I think horror is absolutely in that world. And for me, aftercare is like, I will watch, I don't know, Bob's Burgers or What We Do in the Shadows or something really dumb.
Yeah, even like I came home and was like doing some of the reading and the articles, and like I read pretty late at night, and I was like, oh, I have to stop reading this. Not because I'm scared right now, because like academia has its own horror, but because I was like worried that all of the work I did to like not be thinking about it
Would conjure it back up
yeah,
again.
and then it was hard to like get to sleep and stuff because I was like, I restarted the stress cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a very real thing, especially when you're first delving into horror and you first see something that is actually pretty frightening for the first time. I think that's a pretty standard response.
Yeah.
So you're not alone.
That scene is so
you got
fucked
that
up.
1,000-yard stare.
I like that scene is truly like, it is on my list of like things that I'm terrified will happen to me that like can't happen to me. Theoretically, right? Like we joke on Extra X, I was like, if my body ever gets stuck inside of something else, you have to kill me. Like Bobby and Aaron have made that pact. I was like, this will never happen. If it does, you are agreeing in this moment to kill me.
Yep.
I like having a death pact with all of my best friends. I was going to transition into this next question by saying, and on a more personal level. However, I think we are already on that personal level.
Like it's hard to like that is what happens when you talk about this stuff. Like again, I keep bringing up the Hellraiser episode, but that is a really visceral horror thing, a horror franchise, especially like in a similar way as this one. And so like you have to get personal talking about it like that. You talk with Hellraiser, you talk about like sex and BDSM and like your like internal fluids and like
not having skin
and like the sexual nature of like castration and like things like that. And then in this, it's
cum
like
sacrifice.
right. And then in this one, it's like the sexuality of women, but then also like the power of the like the blood and it's just like it's hard to not be personal when you talk about these really. I mean, Pee Wee Herman's word of the day is visceral, but like when you talk about the visceral, visceral horror, like it is personal. The thing is personal,
very personal,
because it's
and
the
also
fear of the loss of the control and your like insides coming out,
and that's what makes it so personal to the individual watcher of what they transplant that fear into of the unknown, of the whatever, of the abject,
right,
which we were talking about.
You know what's one of the scariest? Sorry.
No, you're good. We're doing it.
One of the scariest moments in this film also reminds me of one of the scariest moments in the show Yellow Jackets, which is also like it's frankly like basically like a coven. That show is great and everybody should watch it. But in the first episode of that, they're playing soccer and one of the girls slips and she breaks her leg and her bone comes out.
Oof.
And in this movie, Sarah, like her bone comes out. And that's real, right? Like people break their legs and their bone comes out. That is a real thing that can happen. The The dance like contortion, that can't happen. That is still supernatural, even though it was filmed in a way that made it real and visceral. But my bone could come out. Your bone could come out. My insides can still come out. Like, that is scary. And being reminded of that, right? Like a really, like, it is so interesting that like a really effective, simple thing, it's because it's real.
Yeah.
Right.
Compound fractures are real, and black metal has existed since the 70s. So men have been making those music videos of women in a forest dancing in blood and fucking wet hair and shit since then. So, like, of course that's what affects you more.
Yeah, totally.
What I was getting towards, and this is personal in a different way because it's personal to you and your brain. We do a lot of podcasts where we dissect media and things like that. And watching things with you has given me a really interesting insight into mental health. Yours, but also like wide spanning. You're very self-professed, don't care about spoilers.
Yeah.
Like you're just like, yeah, tell me what happens. I don't
give a
care.
shit.
Because for you, it's not about what happens. And if you can get that question of what happens out of the way for your brain, it helps your mind be.
I'm not worried about what's happening because I can like exist.
You can engage in the
present.
analytical side of it.
There,
because
I
you're not
feel like it helps your mind be more analytical. And so when I know you're watching these movies and you know I've watched them, you'll send me questions like, I feel like Susie is.
I called it pretty early.
You did. And that's why I wanted to bring it up. You can send me questions being like, I feel like Susie is the actual mother Suspirium. And I can respond to you with not, I'll talk to you in 45 minutes or whatever. I can be like, yes, and when do you think she realized that or when that change happened? Because that's a much more interesting question for your mind to dig into.
Yeah. I know when I realized it. I realized it the moment she had a flashback, or it was like her mother, and her mother was saying to the priest, she is my sin. And I was like, oh, she's Mother Suspirium, 100%.
Yeah.
I think that she realized it, or like realized something was different. I don't know. I actually don't know. But the thing that's coming to my mind is the moment in the dance studio when Madame Blanc is like, I need you to jump. I need you to be higher. I need you to jump. And Susie is like, I need to be on the ground. And even though I'm this like new dancer in the studio and you're the Madame Blanc who's like famous, blah, 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 I'm going to sit here and I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. And I'm going to physically show you why I need to be on the ground. And that like intricate power play there. And her not being like, she wasn't like, I'm right, you're wrong. And even Madame Blanc doesn't even get like mad at her.
No, she doesn't
like,
discipline her. She doesn't do anything.
But that's like the first moment for me when they're like on the same level. And then it's like, so why are they on the same? And like from that moment on, it's when like it starts to tip, and then like they kind of both realize it. And like even when like they do the lesbian telepathy, Tilda Swinton's like shocked for a second and then completely accepts it and is like, yeah, like I knew you were different from the moment you were in this building when I heard your breath and I felt your dance. But I think that moment, because I think it's really, really fucking interesting that neither of them get mad. Neither of them get like trying to assert power over each other. They're in this like artistic conversation, and like by all rights, Madame Blanc should be like, I am the fucking director of this company. This is my dance that I made famous. You are fucking lucky to be there, be here. Shut your fucking Ohio mouth. And she does
have like a small moment of it. She's like,
but she explains
it, but it's not loaded with emotion.
Susie doesn't get punished. She's like, you can see her want to have that reaction, and then she's like, no, I don't know. It's the first moment when they are on the same level for me, which is interesting because they're literally on different levels, because she's like, no, I need to be on the ground. This is where the power is. That's what instinctually I thought of.
Fantastic.
But I figured it out when the mom was like, she's my sin. And I was like, oh, you birth sin. She's Mother Suspirium. And specifically because there's that scene where Madame Blanc is like bitching and like has her fun little glasses, but it's like, the other woman who has the very like severe haircut says like, calls Helena Marcos mother, and Madame Blanc is like, I thought we agreed not to call her that.
Yes. And
she's like, well, she's Mother Suspirium. And she's like, yeah, but is she? Because like,
pretty sure she's not.
What has she done to prove that other than just say I'm Mother Suspiriorum?
And could the actual Mother Suspiriorum become Frida Krueger like that.
Right.
Like, this is an entity that's existed before time.
Right. And it would make sense that, like, if this entity has to exist in a body, that it would be, like, reincarnated and, like, come and, like, have
Absolutely, yes.
times. Like, who's even to say in this, like, new imagination of the three mothers? Like, can they even exist at the same time? Is it, like, this is the age of darkness, this is the age of size? Like, it would make sense that coming out of a world war that theoretically, you know, either veils the world in death or veils the world in darkness, that then the mother of size would come after that age, because, like, that is, like, grief and shame and all that stuff. I don't know. My interpretation of the three mothers is way more interesting than these men.
Absolutely, yes.
I agree.
I agree. Because this podcast is about your journey through horror, and it is cumulative in your knowledge and your experience, I want to bring up and hear you talk about your experience watching Argento's Suspiria, placed against your experience watching the first Phantasm movie, which by all accounts is very derivative of Argento's Suspiria.
Yeah. I actually
and
thought
Giallo
about
as
that.
a whole.
I thought about that visually, at least. It's interesting that I watched these back to back. I didn't love Phantasm because I called it the art of the diminishing return. I think I would have a very different experience of it if I just watched the first one, because I do think that there is a lot to love about the first one. Am I just saying which one I like more?
No, it's just because whether it was the best of the bunch or the best of what we had for that episode, or there were some elements that you generally did like about the first Phantasm movie.
Well, like, one of the things I did like was I loved the set, right? That the long hallways and the high doors and the, like, red and the color. Like, I think the sets and the colors make the otherworldliness come to life in both of them. I mean, they're very similar in that they have very obscure and not clear mythoses around their villains.
And the storytelling is meant to be very dreamlike and
Right.
nondescript and all of that, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I can see how one, but also, like, Phantasm also rips off Dune a lot. So, like, it's just like a movie that loves to
Literally
rip
rips off Dune so hard, yeah.
But then there's a bunch of things in Phantasm that are also ripped off. It's interesting. Horror just, like, cannibalizes itself.
1000%.
But in, like, I mean, all art does that. Like, no art exists in a, like, vacuum.
But especially
like,
genre
horror-
art.
Yeah, horror, part of the fun of it is, like, oh, that's an homage. This is a, quote, new story, but that's an homage.
We can look at a shot and go, oh, that's Evil Dead.
Right.
Oh, that's, that's this. Yeah.
So in a way that makes sense that you could see the original Suspiria for what it is, for a document that has been referenced.
It's a primary source.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
But it's also, this is not as good as everybody says it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's, like I said, it's a polarizing film. That's why I wanted to talk about it.
A lot of those primary sources aren't, whether that be because we're looking at them from different eyes or they're horribly dated.
Right.
You can have film snobs argue about that perspectivity of it or whatever. But
Yeah. Suspiria is interesting because visually it is, like, stunning, and, like, in a very meta way, it really does work in the same way as, like, we talked about how, like, ballet is this mask of the, like, abject horror that's happening in the body and on the body. And, like, I think the visuals of it, of Argento Suspiria, and the sound of it mask the simplicity and the, like, really basic bitch storytelling of it. It's like, this is so stunningly beautiful and so different and sounds so different, and it's, like, such this artistic masterpiece. And in many ways it is, but, like, the actual story, which, like, theoretically should be the point of, like, a film, maybe, I don't know, the actual story and the characters and all of that is, like, weak as shit.
I am connecting two dumb comments that I made, which might mean they mean something or nothing at all, in the same way that final scene in the 2017 Suspiria is just like a black metal music video.
Right.
All of the first one could have just been set to Goblin with no dialogue.
Correct.
Oh, God, it would have been actually, like,
That
way
would have been
better,
really interesting.
I think.
And I know people who do that with a lot of Italian horror and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just you put a soundtrack behind it, because that's a lot of old horror movies were just, like we said, and
Visuals.
that background party that we had for Halloween at your place, it was literally just visuals, words on a screen, creepy music.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, what at that time, I think it has that attitude of, like, what can we do? What can we try out?
Which
and
is-
now it's like we have to reinvent the wheel every fucking time.
Yeah, I mean, As long as you like go into it knowing what it is. Like it's not like
set your expectation.
if you're going in it for a character driven like feminist like story, like that's not what it is.
No, you're not going to get it.
You believed that that's what they said they were making. However,
Right. It's about the vibes.
However.
It's about how pretty these women look when they're dead. That's like from the dude's mouth. So it's like not my death to the author, except for Brian Fuller.
Except for Brian Fuller. You can tweet at us if you want Brian Fuller.
dumb question. What song plays during your Volk?
What song plays during my Volk? My modern dance?
What's your creepy underscore music for your entrancing, soul-sucking torture ritual?
Oh man.
With sacred geometry.
I don't know. I'm not I'm not good
Yeah,
at
sure.
music stuff.
It came to my mind.
Oh, okay. My terrible answer is I would play the Transformed Man by William Shatner.
Oh my God, obsessed.
It's perfect. No notes. We can move on. Let's go towards wrapping this up. Let's move towards wrapping this up now. So we have 2 movies laid in front of us. What are the singular visuals that stick with you from both of them?
I think they're both very obvious. In the first one, it's the opening stained glass scene. Like that's iconic for a reason. It is the like most effective scene there. Like it's beautiful. It's horrific. It's like you got the like blood. That poor like roommate. She's got like glass in her eye. She didn't do anything wrong. And then the like contortion scene. Like there's
Sure, of course.
It's like it lives in me now.
I'm sorry.
It lives in me.
You apologize, and I want to push back against that. This is literally why
the
we're
point.
here. This is the point.
Also, the
She
scene
did
where
ask
she
me
like
about this.
grabs her hands and she's like, "What part do you want to be in this company?" She says, "I want to be the hands." That is like a really like kind of amazing scene.
To me, that's when she starts to know.
Yeah.
Fully.
But this is made to be interpretive like that. Just like the dance. I can cut out my own bad jokes.
No.
Which then leads us to
Spooky scale.
Spooky Scale.
The first one isn't scary. It's just not. I guess like, God, I don't know, 2, 3. Like it's not scary. Even the parts that are like meant to be more gruesome, they're not even gruesome in a stylized way. It's just like that's paint. And that dog is just having a snack.
You've seen slasher movies
Yeah, I've
in
seen
this
some fucked up
series.
shit.
You've seen some fucked up shit. That's never going to be.
That's nothing.
Sure.
It's just like a pretty film. I don't know. Like this would be like, I feel like this would be hard. Like that scene is hard to watch. I feel, and then like she's alive and then the hooks and then like later she's like crawling around in the darkness. I don't know. It's super fucked up. It is like one of the most fucked up things I've ever seen. I don't know how to give the whole movie. Like that scene is a 10. That scene's like a 20. That scene's like a nightmare.
But that is a 4 to 5 minute scene in a 2.5 hour long fucking movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So overall, I would give this movie like an 8 probably. Like it's still pretty fucked up. And like that anticipation too, especially because that's like the big first horror. So then the whole rest of the movie you're like, how does it get worse?
Yeah.
And it like doesn't get worse, but
Those elements with Sarah can also be really scary.
they're not great. But like that was so bad. And then when she's alive, that makes it worse. And then the rest of it was like to me being like, well, how's it going to get worse? So even that like anticipation like makes it scary and fucked up. And then you get to the final scene and you're like, okay, fine. But then there's also kind of like a relief there for me where I was like, oh, is this it?
And I think that's the like quote unquote desensitization that you get sometimes when you watch horror where you're like, this is so unrealistic and so fantastical that I'm not as bothered by it.
There are literally scenes in like, I know I talk about Supernatural all the time,
No,
but
it's
there
a
are
great
scenes
point of
in
reference.
Supernatural that like a CW show that are scarier than that final scene.
Yeah, agreed.
Sure, yeah.
Fully agreed. There were times I was watching Supernatural rewatch Home Alone late at night and I was like,
Season
actually,
1
I can't.
or season 3 episode 1 is a bad episode, but there are some fucked up things in that and it's worse than the final scene.
I mean, we've talked about being scared watching shit that's in the X-Files. It's
Yeah, because they get their bodies in the walls.
Yeah, scary.
The lizard is moving his tail. His head is in a rock. Their faces smashed together.
yeah, no little blanket can fix that.
And a little blanket can fix that. Put a little blanket on it. All right, that's it. We did it. Suspiria. It's in the bag. I never have to watch that scene again. So just a reminder, Helena Handbasket at the Helena Handbasket on Instagram, at Kiddo AC on Instagram, at Only Handbasket on Twitter.
Look at you.
On my socials, I'm at Stella_Cheeks on Twitter. I'm at Stella Cheeks on Instagram. Bobby's at Haberdasher9K. Look at that.
And what's my other embarrassing username?
Fisto Roboto.
Fisto Roboto 83 on Instagram, yeah.
Look, I'm remembering everybody. Oh, and if you want to follow the podcast, you can follow NYD Productions on Twitter and Instagram and use the hashtag Spooky30s. That's a 30. You can also join our Patreon at patreon.com/NYD Productions, where you can get lots of extra stuff, including all of these academic articles that should be free but are not. So you can get access to those things. And then also you can get access to our Discord, where we talk about movies and BattleBots and X-Files and wrestling. And we have a book club and it's super fun. And you can get access to all of that for as little as $1, as many as $1 bajillion. Next month, I will be joined by our friend Ben Silverio of Slash Film, and we'll be discussing, hilariously, Idle Hands. Yeah, I've never seen it, but this will be kind of our, it's not our first foray into comedy, but it is a different type of horror comedy. So we'll be doing that. And it'll be interesting because I think that there's probably not a lot of like hardcore academic articles about it. So maybe it'll be easier.
When I saw that was the movie choice for next month, I was like, based on everything and how academic everything has been, the fact that it's going to be Idle Hands is delightful.
It's going to be a different vibe. And maybe, it'll be our stoner vibe. Yeah, until then, I'm Stella Cheeks. And after 30 plus years of getting over my fears, monsters just make me horny now.
Spooky 30s is created by Stella Cheeks and produced by Bobby Hoffman for NYD Productions. Our show theme is made by Resonate_music, and our show art is by Lauren Moran.